Before the video starts, I do want to preface this video by saying I actually really love the meme culture around Warhammer, and I'm really fine with Ultramarines being picked on. This is not that type of video where I'm like, oh, I can't believe my favorite chapter is being picked on. What it is sort of doing is exercising a video essay, because we're planning on working on another one much bigger, and it's going to be much more important that we get things right in that one.
Of course, they're recognizable by just about anybody. The same thing goes for Warhammer, like there are signs that you always know. But for one would be the Ultramarines, right? They are always the promotional material.
I still think the Ultramarines are trash, though. I still not a big fan of the Ultramarines.
Yeah, you must really hate Ultramarines. I hate them. This is the person talking to me. I hate them.
Some things will never die, such as the prejudice many fans feel towards
weakness and lack of personality.
My intro to Warhammer is probably one that a lot of people can identify with, because they probably went through the same thing. I was introduced through Warhammer through Dawn of War 2 in 2009, and it was one of the first computer games I ever played, so this whole universe just captured my imagination, and I've just been enthralled and love-drunk with this franchise since then. However, I'd never really gotten into the hobby side or tabletop for a long time, and that was just because of the skills it needed to get into it and the money needed to get into it. So around 2019, I got back into the hobby side of Warhammer because I loved Space Marines. I fell in love with the Blood Angels. Well, I originally played only Tyranids on Dawn of War. I quickly then started playing the Blood Ravens, and I fell in love with the Blood Ravens and Space Marines and everything Space Marine. However, when I came back to the hobby, I had known a lot more lore, and I decided I didn't really want to paint my Space Marines up as Blood Ravens. I found a few other Space Marine chapters that I really were interested in, which were the Dark Angels, the Blood Angels, Space Wolves, and Ultramarines. I ended up finding the Ultramarines to be the most interesting of all of them, and I ended up making Ultramarine Army. As I've gone on in the hobby community, I've noticed a lot of misconceptions about the Ultramarines, which are both posed by memes and just people not liking the Ultramarines due to them being poster boys. So this video is sort of going to talk about those misconceptions and add background and information, and maybe you might change your mind about the Ultramarines. If not, you're going to see just more of a holistic view of Warhammer. The first misconception, and everybody's gonna love this one that I'm tackling first, is the idea that the Ultramarines get all the new releases, and they're constantly on every single and featured everywhere. And to some degree that is actually true. They are the poster boys, they're on every box, they're on every comic, they're on this, they're on that, every video game. I mean, we're literally getting a new video game called Space Marines, and it has an Ultramarine on it. However, that's not actually sort of true, because if you really take a step back and look at like what the Ultramarines have, a lot of their Ultramarine-ness has been removed from their 40k variant, and that's because they have to fit everywhere else. One of the prime examples of this I would cite is Indomitus. The Indomitus box set came out, and all the Ultramarines on the box were painted up in Ultramarine blue. But none of them were unique. They all could be played in other legions. And this goes for most Ultramarine captains, most captains in general. The only recent one that we have gotten for Ultramarines is Uriel Ventress. Recently, I went on the GW website and recorded what I was doing on. While I was there, I looked at how many unique units each army gets to really highlight my point of this idea. When I went through and counted, the Ultramarines only had 7 unique bundles / things for sale. Of those, this also counts bundle boxes and characters. If you remove bundle boxes and characters, they're left with only one specialty unit that comes in a character box, and that's the Victrix Honor Guard, compared to other chapters such as Black Templars with 10 unique things, Blood Angels with 15 unique units, Dark Angels with 24, and Space Wolves with a whopping 25. If you count Logan, Grimnar, and a few others, you're getting to 27. So this idea that the Ultramarines get all the unique things, everything is Ultramarine, isn't necessarily true. It's the same issue with Primaris they were having of Space Marines just started to look generic, and because the Ultramarines have become the poster boys, they are the default generic Space Marine chapter, when that's not actually true. This really does pull away from not only the culture of the Ultramarines, but the Ultramarines minis itself. The Ultramarines look very generic, as previously stated, because they are the poster boy. So every single time a new release happens, they have to fit every single Space Marine chapter, not anything too Romanesque. If you want to see a really good example of this, let's take 30k. Re-release in a new lease on life. And I think it's time, let's look at some of the Ultramarines there. On screen, you see right now a 40k Ultramarine. What I am putting up next to it is a 30k Ultramarine. You can clearly tell one has a lot more personality than the other. And this is because in 30k, the Ultramarines are not the poster boys. I'll get to this point later on in the video again, but keep that in mind that in 30k, the Ultramarines are not poster boys. They have room to be very unique and very Roman. And this gives their models a really necessary look, a really iconic and unique look. This pumps up the Roman aesthetic to the extreme. These are space Romans, and that's what they really are within the lore. However, this generic having to fit into every single other chapter doesn't only affect their modeling style, it affects their rules. Because the Ultramarines are the base for every other Space Marine chapter. Every time GW releases a new codex or index or anything else like that, they are much better and have a lot more flavor than the Ultramarine. And a good example of this is take the Space Marine 9th edition codex. Then let's throw into the mix the armies that have their own codex that are Space Marine. I mean, look at Dark Angels can take a whole Terminator army. No other chapter can do that. The Wolves have the capability to run a Dreadnought only army, and I am even referring to having a Dreadnought in the HQ without having to use Legends rules. Genuinely, the Horus Heresy stuff is what really got me to fall in love with the Ultramarines. Books like No Fear was the reason why I painted Ultramarines. I was on the fence between Wolves and Ultramarines, and I picked Ultramarines because of books like No Fear. Anyways, after that tangent, I'm going to get back to what I was talking about. So the books that I read, 3 of them were Warhammer 40k, and they were the Dark Imperium trilogy. Then I read No Fear by Dan Abnett. The next book was Unremembered Empire, also written by Dan Abnett. I finished up the reading with Praetorian of Dorne all of these books really help sort of, I feel like, define what the Ultramarine personality is, and I think it's a two-pronged thing, because you have their Primarch that has his own distinctive personality, then you have the Ultramarine Legion and Chapter themselves that each have their own personality. So the real personality of the Ultramarines is really described within the Unremembered Empire. There's an event in the Unremembered Empire where Guilliman shows up to an Ultramarine garrison, and they didn't polish their armor that day. So then the next day, these Space Marines polish their armor so much that they can see the face. Guilliman says to the Space Marine, "You're trying too hard." The Sergeant Space Marine looks back up to him. He says, "Besides, we're Ultramarines. Isn't trying too hard the point of us?" That sums up the chapter perfectly, because think about it. You have Guilliman, an overachiever, somebody who's a god amongst men who can build empires easily. There's no way that a normal Space Marine can live up to that, and yet they still attempt to live up to their gene sire's lineage. They try to live up to the lineage of being Guilliman's son. It sums up their personality succinctly, while giving them some self-aware tendencies, but at the same time, it's enough to show that they are not perfect like the community has always told us. These are not perfect Marines. They just try really hard. They never give up. I think it honestly highlights a really big part of how human the Ultramarines are. I mean, they're trying to live up to the status quo their father set of being that they have no chance to live up to, doing the same things he did. He outperforms other Primarchs. How are they ever supposed to live? How is this Legion, this chapter, ever supposed to live up to the goals he set? Next is Guilliman. Guilliman is a polarizing figure because he's really different between 30k and 40k. In 30k, he's always looking to the future, always what's coming up next. He's the empire builder. He organizes everything, he does everything. He does all the paperwork. One of the best scenes, I feel like, that sums up Guilliman that's in the Unremembered Empire from 30k is when he creates a whole war room for just him, his brothers, and his father to converse on the state of the Imperium. Guilliman in 30k, well, not understanding a lot of his brothers because he's not fueled by passion like all the others, still loves and respects them. And I think that's really the core point of Guilliman, is his passion is different than everybody else. We all know this one person that seems to be sort of like empathetic or like doesn't seem to have any passion, but I feel like Guilliman is a misinterpretation. I think he has passion. It's clear that he has passion, but his passions are building empires, helping people. He doesn't understand people like Ingran that are only driven by his passion. He doesn't let his passion control him. Brothers, even Lionel Johnson lets his passion and his emotions control him. We see that with when he's finding Conrad Kurz. The only other Primarch that we see doesn't really let his passion control him is Rogel Dorn. And then Guilliman in 40k has a completely different personality because he is just in such a different place. It's really interesting if you read the 3 Dark Imperium novels, and his personality has drastically changed. We now get to see that passion that he had so reserved come out all the time. He's a lot angrier now. He is a lot more motivated. He's the only son of the Emperor left, and he has to do something, and the weight of the whole Imperium has fallen on his shoulders. On top of the weight of the world on his shoulders, I think it's a really interesting seed that the writers have added for Guilliman, that he feels like a tool. Because if you think about it, Guilliman did not get a lot of time spent with the Emperor. He got the standard amount and then sent off. And when that happens, when he was sent off, he almost never talks to the Emperor. He's off doing compliance, he's building empires, he's doing other things. But other sons, like Horus and like Magnus, even Perturabo, spent more time with the Emperor than Guilliman did. Now Guilliman's the last son, the only one left that's still loyal to the Emperor. And yet he's treated as a tool almost. Now there's some debate on whether the Emperor sees him as a son or a tool, but I'm talking purely from Guilliman's point of view from the Dark Imperium novels. He truly just sees himself as a tool to the Emperor, unlike all his other brothers. Many times we're told that the Ultramarines see them perfect, and that they're arrogant, and that's not really true. It highlights the differences in the chapters. If you look at how a wolf fights compared to an Ultramarine and how an Ultramarine fights, they're drastically different. And since the Ultramarines are very successful in what they do and what they're good at, oftentimes that might come across as being arrogant, but it's really just confidence. It's a different set of confidence compared to the wolves. Because the wolves are confident they can just run in and get kills. The Ultramarines are confident that the Codex Astartes has the wisdom they need to win the battle. The Ultramarines are confident that their abilities as tacticians can lead them through the battle. Furthermore, we see unique and awesome lore tidbits within all these books of the Ultramarine culture that is very much lost in all factions if you only read their codex. The prime example I have this is the red helmets. See, in Ultramarines, red helmets indicated sergeants, but that wasn't always the case. In 30k, that's not the case. What happened was one of the Ultramarine Space Marines did an analytical run on the Ultramarines fighting other legions. And then he fought against other Space Marines, way before the thought of the Horus Heresy ever began. That was, at that time period, that was seen as almost blasphemy. So he had to paint his helmet red as an indicator that he had been censured for his crimes. However, after Calth and the burning of Calth and other things like that, the Ultramarines started to paint all their sergeants' helmets red. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is power scaling, because often what it feels like within the lore in the Warhammer community, doing things that are higher beyond their power level because they're Ultramarines, which is not actually true. We see many Space Marines punching above their weight and they don't get questioned, but whenever an Ultramarine does it, they get questioned. Example of this is with Calgar. Before we touch on the example, we need to first establish Calgar. See, Calgar is a chapter master, so he's already really strong. Then he's had years of experience. Now let's also add that he is basically a mini dreadnought. He is in Terminator armor or tactical dreadnought armor, and all of his limbs have been replaced with robotic ones. So now it would be easy to understand him lifting a Necron pylon or fighting a Swarm Lord, kind of like what Dante did. And just like Dante, Calgar was wounded severely his first fight with the Swarm Lord, just like Dante was in his fight with the Swarm Lord. Then Calgar came back and won. but people question Kalgar's power level but not Dante's. Another character that another example of this that drives me nuts is Blackmane. If you haven't seen on my channel, we did a kit bash of Kato Sicaria. I recently have been having to paint up wolves for one of my friends, so I've been reading a lot of wolf lore, and I was reading stuff about Blackmane. And Blackmane has done almost the exact same stuff Kato has done, but nobody in the wolf community has ever really given him shit for the same thing Kato's done. But yet, Kato is somehow a Mary Sue for it. I could continue pointing out other points. I could continue bringing examples all day, but it's gonna be a waste of time eventually, because you all are gonna be picking up what I'm putting down. There are double standards within people who consume the lore, and you don't really think about it when it's your favorite faction. It's sort of like people not questioning how one of the Eldar Harlequins can kill Custodes because they're a fan of Eldar. Ultramarines oftentimes get blamed for what GW does. And this is honestly really unfair to not only Ultramarines but Ultramarine players, because it's not our fault. Don't blame the Ultramarines just because they're the poster boys for GW. One of the prime examples I have is the transfer sheet for Space Marines with the decals that came with it. Used to come with all Space Marine chapters, so if you were painting them up for Raven Guard, you would have the transfers. If you were painting them up for Ultramarines, you would have the transfers. I don't know exactly when, because I couldn't find a date to pin down in my research. According to my research, around 2016, they started to remove the transfer sheets and replace them with only Ultramarine transfer sheets. Which, if I was playing another chapter, which I do play another chapter, I play Blood Angels, and this is why I can say this, it was super hard to find transfers for Blood Angels, and I can understand why somebody would be really mad that they took the transfer sheets out. But to blame Ultramarines for that is really unfair, because it's not their fault. That's GW. GW constantly has been making mistakes lately. So I'm gonna move to my next point before I sit here and rant for hours on all the shit that GW does wrong. My theory of why the Ultramarines get a lot of hate is sort of like a meta idea. So, hear me out, let's see if this is actually how it is, and if you disagree with me, say in the comments, but it's an interesting idea if you think about it. For lack of a better way of phrasing, they hate on the one that gets the most popular. So, what I mean by this is the fans in the community that are Xenos players and Chaos players get very little love from GW. So they tend to hate on all Imperial factions, because the Imperials get a lot of love from. Then the Guards, Sisters, players, Custodes, all hate on the Space Marines, because the Space Marines get the most love from GW. There's always new Space Marines. Then all the chapters who are Space Marines, who don't want to be, who sort of just pile on with it, also hate on the Ultramarines, because they're the most favorite Space Marine chapters of the favorite Space Marines who get the most love out of anybody. And that's why a lot of times they get picked on. And the reason why I say this, and I have sort of some evidence to back this up, is I reached out to many people within the Horus Heresy community before Horus Heresy 2.0 came out. The reason why I did this was because with Horus Heresy 2.0 coming out, there's a new influx of players in there, in a whole new community. So I wanted to get the original community before all the 40k players ran to it. And this surprised me. So 9 times out of 10, they didn't actually hate the Ultramarines. They found them really interesting and unique. The ones they hated the most were the Sons of Horus and the Imperial Fists. And this is where I'm saying Ultramarine effect, because I think a lot of the hate the Imperial Fists gets and the Sons of Horus get are the same kind of hate that the Ultramarine gets for being in 40k. And I really think that is summed up in what I mean in this title of the Ultramarine effect. It's because this idea that because they're seen everywhere, everybody hates them. Because they're seen everywhere, a lot of people have disdain for them, and because of their past, a lot of people have disdain for them. With Matt Ward in 5th edition, the Ultramarines very much left a bitter taste in people's mouths.
I just fell in love. Like they got to me.
I really do love the Ultramarines, and I'm excited to tell you all about them.
His badassery comes from the fact that despite being chosen as the administrator, he pushes himself to become a demigod of war, making even the most insane berserkers of Khorne no fear, and regularly challenging and even beating creatures significantly more powerful than he.
This in here. And it's something I often see talked about, mentioned of, commented on, which is of course people bemoaning the fact that my primary 40k army is Ultramarines. I hear people going, oh, of course LT plays Ultramarines, blah blah blah. Now, personally, I couldn't care less about people stressing about which colour of toy soldiers I choose to collect.
Single realm has done more to contribute to the power of the Imperium, or win more glory in the name of the Emperor, than that of Ultramar. The corruption and ineffectual rule that continues to plague the Imperium has seemingly never taken root in Ultramar, and great effort is made to safeguard the prosperity of its citizenry, so long as military requirements are met.